This is a convoluted story, so bear with me as I try to convey everything I can recall about what led me to the conclusion that my ex-housemate could have potentially been a serial killer, or at least one in the making. It was the summer of 2015 when I moved in, and at first appearances, my housemate/landlord Mike was somewhat normal, if not a bit socially awkward and dysfunctional. When I was signing the papers, he was adamant that I should never go into the basement, which I thought was a bit odd. I really needed a place to stay though, and well, people have their little quirks, so I chalked it up to just being that at the time. As I got to know Mike and our cohabitation continued, I learned more about the depths of his dysfunction. Firstly, that he used meth. I don't automatically judge people based on vices, but I was surprised at the extent of his use. He was probably the first person I knew who used meth and balanced a full-time job, enjoyed a decent amount of success. The reason this is important to the story is that when he would be around the house drinking and using meth, he would start to run off at the mouth. He would often joke that if I smelled lye coming from the basement, not to think anything of it. I think it was probably the third time he said this, that I asked him finally why he kept on saying that. He said, "I use chemicals to clean up after the bodies," with this wily grin on his face. I tried to chalk that up to being a bad sense of humor, but something just didn't sit right with me. He was also very particular that I let him know of my coming and going, and my work schedule. I remember him being shocked and uncomfortable one day that I ended up taking off work because he didn't realize that I was home. I remember that day because there was a lot of clanging and what sounded like muffled shouting coming from the basement. His car was in the driveway, but he was not in the main house or his bedroom. Other days he would play very loud music that bumped through the whole house. Sometimes he would even play NPR talk radio at those volumes. In retrospect, I think he may have been trying to mask sounds. He would make remarks about sex workers, saying, "You can do whatever you want. You can choke them or beat them to death and nobody cares." I took exception to this. I told him I thought that was messed up. But when he would get tweaking, he would always come back around to alluding to the same kind of violence, talking about how he was a normal white guy who owned a house and had a good career, so the police would never suspect him. It was about this point that I started to think that it had gone too far to simply be a joke. I was in a weird position because money was tight at the time and my options were few and far between. I tried to convince myself that even if he was messed up, he was probably just engaging in some outward fantasism. I knew he would acquire the services of sex workers on occasion, but again, I didn't judge that activity at face value. I started to become a bit concerned, though. At one point, while I was doing laundry, I caught whiffs of decomposition. The house we were in was in southeast Portland. It was relatively new. Having grown up in upstate New York, I knew that animals could be trapped in walls and die, but this was the garage, and there were no animals scurrying in the walls. This was strange and telling to me. I considered carefully what I should do, and decided I would confront him about the smell. I decided to poise the question in a somewhat suggestive way by expanding upon his jokes. I told him that he needs to do a better job cleaning up the bodies because I smelled decomposition from the garage. I'll never forget his reaction. His eyes widened. He shot me a sharp glare, somewhere between fear and anger, and he stumbled over his words before eventually responding, "What? Really?" There were a few more seconds of awkwardness before he said, "Thanks for letting me know." He promptly went into his bedroom and shut the door. A few days after that, he went into the upper crawlspace in the garage while I was again doing laundry. He called for me and was trying to convince me to come up into the crawlspace. My body locked up, and it was like my instincts were screaming at me. If I went up there, I would not come back down. I gave some excuse I can sparsely remember that I had to be someplace else, packed my laundry, threw it in my room, and left. He spent a lot of time in the padlocked basement without a doorknob. The only way in was through the backyard. I wish I would have gone down there in retrospect to either confirm or dismiss the suspicions once and for all. In the last couple of months I lived there, I was privy to more graphic comments about women and sex workers, explicit talk of sexual violence he was using more and more. He once showed me a video he made, he's a graphic designer and artist as well, which featured heavy bondage themes interspersed with distorted audio of women screaming and a strange leering figure in a plague doctor costume. It was one of those situations where any one of those things alone may be innocuous, but as they accumulated, it became even more suspicious to me. It was October of 2016 that I left there, and taking off to Oseti Oyate camp during the anti-pipeline protests with Standing Rock, Lakota. A mix of feeling called to action and having nothing to lose, as I wanted to get out of that house in the worst way. My last night there, as I did not give notice that I was leaving, he was drinking and tweaking again, started in on the same conversation, loosely describing murder and sexual violence in the tone of some sort of edgy joke. I told him he would be caught eventually, not even holding back my suspicion anymore. He reiterated that he was the last person police would suspect and asserted that they wouldn't catch him. He said this in a very serious and concise way, dropping the pretense he had been using before. I left the very next morning. This haunted me for months, then a year and a half. I felt as though I hadn't done anything. The guilt was eating away at me. So I called Portland Crime Stoppers and put in an anonymous tip describing what I had described here. When I did, the operator started going back and forth, putting me on hold because the call had piqued the interest of the police sergeant who was assigned to the call center. They were asking me detailed questions about his vehicle, his house, the methods he described. It seemed like they took a vivid interest. I gave them as much information as I could remember and left it at that, feeling at least just a little better that I had tried to do something about it. Fast forward to recent times. I told my mother about all this, and she became interested, asking what house this was. She ended up pulling it up on Google Maps. She put up the street view, and I noticed there was a large enclosed trailer in the driveway that wasn't there when I was. I could theorize why it might have been there, but I cannot put together a practical reason for it, or why he'd be using it, unless he was moving or using it to haul things to discard. Admittedly, this is pure conjecture, but I couldn't help but wonder. I doubt that I'll get closure or have my suspicions validated unless he does finally get caught and arrested, and I read about it. I've grown up poor and even been around the lowlife a lot. I've interacted with many sketchy and unsavory people in my time, but none of them has ever made the impression that Mike made on me. Make of it what you will, but I hope I never meet him again. In high school, I had the glamorous job of scooping ice cream at a local and well-known chain. I had worked there for about 3 years, but this story occurred at the beginning of my senior year. It was possibly a Monday or Tuesday, and on weeknight closing shifts there were only 2 people on duty, a manager and server. I was a server, and my manager, who was also a girl but in her early 20s, who I'll call Jen, was in the back counting the money from our shift, whilst I was at the front of the store starting to clean in order to close soon. It was about a half hour till closing time, when I noticed this really nice car pull up just in front of the store. I remember being impressed and went back to cleaning. The customer came in about 15 minutes later. He was a white man in his early 30s, with brown hair and a nice smile. He sat at a table and pulled out a portfolio with papers and began to write on them. At that point, I was a little bit irritated that he had chosen an ice cream store at 8:30 p.m. on a Monday night to get some work done when there was a Starbucks literally just next door. I continued to clean, and a few minutes later, he approached the counter, seemingly ready to order. His body language was immediately off-putting as he leaned on the case of ice cream, getting as close to me as he could without actually climbing over the case. I got a weird feeling right away, and suddenly became very aware that I was a 5'3", 105-pound 17-year-old girl, all alone with this man. My manager Jen was in the back office and unaware that a customer had even come inside. I politely asked the man what I could get for him. I don't remember his exact order, but it was something odd and uncommon with a weird mixture of flavors and toppings. I turned around to make his order and felt his eyes staring into my back. I turned around slightly to get an idea of where he was standing, and there he was, still leaning over the case with his forearms on top and smiling at me. He tried making small talk about ice cream, if the store was usually not busy at that point, even calling me pretty. I quickly made his weird order so my back wouldn't be turned to him, and so he could just hurry up and leave. I handed him his order and rung it up at the register. His total was probably between $5 and $6, yet he tried to hand me a $20 bill as a tip. I told him I couldn't take that much money, so instead he smiled at me and stuffed it into the tip jar on the counter. I thanked him and glanced at the kitchen where Jen was standing in the doorway. She was out of the customer's view, but waved me over to come to the back. I walked away from the customer, who sat back at his table with his peers. Before I could tell Jen that I was getting a weird vibe from the man, she told me she also didn't feel right about him and was going to call another manager, Ryan, who lived about 5 minutes away. Ryan was a 6-foot-tall college student, so we'd feel a little more protected with him in the store. I told Jen to do that just in case, and that I would try to get the customer to leave since we were only a few minutes away from closing. Within those few moments, Ryan came in the front door and looked the customer up, then down, then went into the back to talk to Jen. At that point, I think the customer put 2 and 2 together and realized Ryan was there to keep an eye on him. With Jen and Ryan in the back watching me, the customer got up and collected his papers. He walked over to the case of ice cream and said, "Margaret?" I jumped up and looked at him, wondering how the hell he knew my name. He sat a small piece of paper on top of the case, gave me one more smile, and left. As soon as he walked out, Ryan locked the front door and looked at the piece of paper the customer had left. Scribbled in pencil was the man's contact info. His name, cell phone number, email address, even Twitter username. We ended up calling the police, who took our stories, but they said the man didn't do anything illegal. If he ever came back, to call them again just in case he tried, though. The entire encounter was just so bizarre. From his super fancy car, working on papers in an ice cream store late on a weeknight, the way he stared at me, his strange order, the $20 tip. But the most unsettling part is just how he knew my name. I've had friends who've heard this story tell me that I must have had my name tag on. In fact, though, I regularly got in trouble for not wearing it, and that night was no exception. Not to mention the fact that I'd never seen him before in my life, so he wouldn't have known me another way. My manager speculated that maybe he was a weird sugar daddy or possibly even a sex trafficker trying to scope me out. Ultimately, the entire situation felt very off, and I've never felt my instincts kick in like that and haven't since. I kept myself on high alert until I moved away to college. I'm 24 years old now and haven't seen him since, but every now and then I think about that man and wonder just what his true intentions were. I'm a security guard, 22 and male, and was working the graveyard shift from 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. I was posted at a library where my main task was to watch out for trespassers, particularly an older male who kept coming back to skulk about the library overnight. The library actually had a bolo out for him as well, and emailed me a photo of him, so I was on the lookout. Around 1 a.m., I got up from the security desk to go out on a patrol. As I approached the door to go outside, I saw 2 homeless people sitting outside on a bench with a large shopping cart covered by a blue tarp. Not joking about this. The tarp had red stains all over it. Being generally creeped out already, I hesitated to even go outside at all. I thought about just using the on-site cell phone to call the police department, as that's what I'm supposed to do. However, I decided it wouldn't be right for me to call without politely letting the couple know they were trespassing first, and give them an opportunity to leave without incident. It would have been less work for me as well, as any time I have to call the police department, I have to make an incident report. I grabbed my flashlight and walked outside, identifying myself as security and letting the couple know that they needed to leave the premises. They were a younger African-American couple, and neither one matched the description of the bolo suspect. The man was pacing back and forth, smoking a cigar and writing something down on a notepad. The woman was sitting down, sort of just staring off into space. Anyway, I asked them both to leave. The woman began arguing with me about how she was homeless and how the police had already told her she could stay there. I knew that this was obviously a lie and told her that she needed to leave once again. We got onto the subject of how they were loitering, and I kept trying to explain to her that she was, and that they weren't allowed to stay overnight at the library. She began to argue with me about the definition of loitering, and just generally started being a pain in the butt. This whole time the man had said absolutely nothing, and was just off in his own world, continuing to pace back and forth and chain smoke. I realized I wasn't going to get anywhere by being nice, so I informed them that I would be calling the police, and retreated back inside the security room to call. 10 minutes went by after I called, and the couple appeared to be gone. A few moments later, the police arrived, and I went outside to talk to them. They didn't really seem to care much, as to be expected though, and once they saw that they were gone, they just told me to call them back if they returned. So, I go out on patrol, and as I'm making my way around the building, I run into the same woman who I'd just called the police on. She was now by herself, and the man was nowhere to be seen. She had this very odd stance. It's a bit difficult to describe, but if you've ever played any of the Silent Hill games, her posture was similar to the way that the nurses from Silent Hill stand. And I didn't even say anything to her, and she didn't seem able to notice me at all. I went back to where the police were still parked, and told them she was still on the premises. They got out of their cars and walked with me to where she was standing, and asked her to leave. She started telling them she had permission to be there, and that the sheriff had told her she was allowed. They told her she wasn't, and to make a long story short, she eventually left one way or the other, or so I thought. After the police finally left, I went back inside and made myself a cup of coffee. I decided I wanted a little fresh air though, so I stood outside and started to drink. It was around 2 a.m. at this point. This is where things get really creepy. Next to the library parking lot is this big park with a playground. I started to hear what sounded like faint whispers, followed by menacing laughter. I looked over in the direction of the noise, and barely managed to spot the couple hiding away. The man had returned, and was standing next to the woman from earlier. They were both just standing there, staring at me. Because it was so dark and they were hiding, I could only make out their silhouettes, but their eyes were literally glowing, kind of like when a person's eyes glow in a picture. The woman kept laughing, while the man said in a slow monotone voice all the different ways he was going to hurt me. He said it loudly enough to understand what he was saying, and I knew he was talking about me. He was talking about cutting my face off and skinning me. Then he shouts, "That uniform doesn't make you tough." At that point, I just got too sketched out and went inside to finish my shift. The rest of the night was unsettling too, because I kept hearing voices outside and tapping on all of the walls and doors. I knew it was them. Luckily though, they couldn't get inside without a keycard. When my shift finally ended, and it was once again daylight outside, I went to my car. There was a sticky note attached that read, "Next time, you won't be so lucky," with a crosshair symbol next to the words. Needless to say, I'm never returning to that library overnight again. I used to work as a housekeeper for this company that would assign me to different houses in the area that were hiring. I had this one job at a house that was just a few towns over one night. I was a bit reluctant to go since it was already late, but I knew an old back road that would cut the driving time in half. It used to be an old logging road, and there were tons of them here in Oregon that could be handy shortcuts to different places. One downside, though, was that the road was extremely small, windy, and if you got into a crash, you'd basically be stranded in the middle of nowhere and surrounded by a forest. I'm not sure it was completely legal to drive on either. So, anyways, I was driving down this road, groggy and tired, when I suddenly felt a small collision on my trunk. I cursed and pulled over to inspect the damage and talked to the driver, who had seemingly come out of nowhere. He pulled up behind me. I got out of my car and walked over to him, asked if he was okay. I was about 3 feet from his car, and I could see him sitting in there, but he wasn't making any effort to get out. It was winter and night, so everything was pitch black, and I could barely see anything, but I knew there was a figure there. It was freezing cold already, and I was starting to get creeped out, so I told him since there was barely any damage, I was just going to leave. As I started to head back to my car, though, I heard his door shoot open behind me. I turned around and saw him standing there. He was extremely tall and had on a large black coat and baggy jeans. I stepped towards him and noticed something that made my heart sink. His hands were white-skinned, but his face looked dark. I squinted and realized he was wearing black makeup on his face. This scared me even more because I was thinking he was wearing blackface, and for the record, I'm black. I thought maybe he had followed me out here into the middle of nowhere to harm me. I turned around and started to go for my car when I felt the cold tip of a gun press against the back of my head. I was ready to cry at this point, thinking I was going to die alone out here because of my skin color. I ended up trying to reason with him, but I could barely choke out my words as I told him he didn't have to do this. Something surprising happened, though. The man was silent, and then he started to cry as well. He just jumped back in his car and sped off. Maybe I should have tried to see the license plate, but at that moment I just got in my car, drove home, and called my parents. I never, ever in my entire life thought I'd narrowly escape from being the victim of what could possibly be a hate crime. I'm glad the man had a change of heart, or whatever you want to call his reasoning for sparing me that night.